dear participants, it's our great honor and privilege to introduce you our friend and honorary professor of our university, Professor and Dean of Faculty of Liberal Arts, Nonaka Susumu from Saitama University, Japan. The floor is yours, Susumu.
Hi. Do you hear me, right?
Yes, yes, we can hear you very well. Glad to see you.
Добрый день, дорогие коллеги. Меня зовут Susumu Nonaka. Excuse me for my English, but I'll show my text. Yeah. Please make it possible to show my material.
Покажи. Would you like us to demonstrate your article?
No. Let me make.
Yes, I am to give you such a, yeah. Just give me a second. Yes, please. Now you can.
Thank you. Yeah. I think this.
Yes, we can see. Yes,
yeah,
we can see. Yes,
this will help you understand my poor English better. First, let me say that I'm very honored to take part in the Google reading, especially this year. We all know how difficult mentally and physically it is for you to organize a conference on literature and arts in such difficult times. But at the same time, you are showing how important and necessary literature and arts are for us, all the more because of such hardships. I believe that the Google readings and other efforts of yours for the humanities and the literary education and for the younger generation will be legends for those who are engaged in them. Today, I will talk about, not about Gogol, but Japanese writer Yasunari Kawabata and his novel Southern Cranes, which is used as a material of foreign literature at some Ukrainian schools. The theoretical topic of my lecture will be what is a national writer? As the first Japanese Nobel Prize winning author, Kawabata once played a prominent role as a national writer and is still regarded as one of the most important writers who helped create modern Japanese literature. But what is a national writer? What is he or she expected to create? What conditions does he or she have to meet to be regarded national? And lastly, why do we need a national writer? I think these questions will be relevant for many countries, including Ukraine. My speech will consist of three parts: introduction, the general features of Kawabata's literary works, and Thousand Cranes as a novel by a national writer. This is a photo of Kawabata in his younger days. And this is when he was already old. You see, this is how elder Japanese in former days live and work. Like he's sitting on tatami and use such a desk, when he wrote. Introduction. Who is Kawabata? Yasunari Kawabata was born in 1899 in Osaka, an economic and cultural center of Western Japan. His father, a doctor, died when he was 1 year old, and his mother died when he was 2. The young Yasunari was raised by his grandparents. In his works, Kawabata often referred to the motif of orphanhood throughout his life. Kawabata made his literary debut while he studied at the University of Tokyo. He then was regarded as a main member of a young writers group called Neo-Sensualism, a version of modernist writing which aimed at defamiliarizing descriptions of reality by way of making a new combination of subjectivity and objectivity. The most famous works of Kawabata before the World War II are short story Dancer in Izu, 1926, and a series of short stories Snow Country, both of which were repeatedly made into movies and TV dramas. After the war, Kawabata wrote several works focusing on Japanese traditional beauty, which are regarded as the main reason for his being awarded the Nobel Prize in 1968. The novel Thousand Cranes also belonged to the works of this period. In parallel with the theme of Japanese traditional beauty, Kawabata continued to deepen another central theme of his creation, sexuality. The novella House of Sleeping Beauties caused a sensation in that Kawabata blatantly themed the sexuality of old men in both fantastic and realistic mode. One can see Thousand Cranes is a combination of the above two themes, as the beauty of precious old Japanese tea bowls symbolizes their such sexual love as defies social norms and personal ethics. Kawabata committed suicide in 1972 at the age of 73 without leaving a will. It has been said that he had been suffering from sleeping pill addiction and psychological depression. A general feature of Kawabata's literary works. Now try I will summarize the general features of Kawabata's literary works from the viewpoint of conditions of the creation of a national writer. First, depiction of people. To depict folk people is a central task of modern national literature. Let me explain why. Every country which has started modernization has to deal with many projects, the most basic of which is nation building. The humanities such as historical studies, linguistics, folklore, literature, and arts are required to show what the nation is, that is, what we are as a nation's citizens. When and how was it born? What has it achieved in its history? How is it different from others? What mission it has in world history, and so on. These questions play a driving force of nation building in each respective country. Um, and in this respect, what is important to deal with is folk people, or more concretely, poor farmers and workers. They have much less chances to reap the benefits of modernization as material well-being, education, or enlightenment than the upper social classes, although they actually form a large part of the nation. Gaps between classes, the rich and the poor, educated and uneducated, should be relieved to achieve successful nation building. National literature is required to depict how people are living and how upper classes should be united with them toward the goal of becoming a free-fledged nation. One can see that young Kawabata consciously or unconsciously chose such a theme in works such as Dancer in Izu and Snow Country. In Dancer in Izu, the hero is a university student who has an inferiority complex about his orphanhood. He was traveling alone in the countryside called Izu when he by chance became close with a barnstorming small theater company. Kindness and innocence of uneducated actors and actresses, especially a young girl whom he particularly liked, soothed his heart so that he regained confidence and parted with them to go back to Tokyo to continue his studies. This short story is one of Kawabata's most famous works. It was made into movies and TV dramas many times and gave him nationwide popularity. In my opinion, it is a plot model. An intelligent individual meets the people and learns something very important, which helped, uh, which helped to make this short story a work of national literature. What is distinctive about Kawabata is that he often tended to depict people such as traveling entertainers, geisha in country towns, or urban poor rather than village peasants, which has been a more orthodox object of description in national literature. But urbanization and population mobility, accelerated by modernization, created the new groups of the people in cities and towns whom Kawabata depicted. In this respect, he anticipated a new stage in the development of national literature in Japan. Meanwhile, as we will see with Thousand Cranes, he depicted folk people much less after World War II, while he chose more often heroes and heroines from the middle class. I suppose it has to do with the theme of war. The second theme of war. Kawabata did not serve in World War II and seldom depicted frontline battles or air raids on cities themselves. But the theme of the war played a crucial role in his literary creation. For example, he often described war widows. In the novel The Sound of the Mountain, a war widow having an affair with the heroine's husband says that if they should give her back her killed husband, she also would return a man to his wife. The more important subject with the theme of the war is a connection with the dead. In the short story Sazanka, Kawabata thought about children who had not been born because of the war and concluded, while pitying them and my own life, which flowed away during the war, I wondered if they might be reborn into something someday. In Thousand Cranes, this subject is given a somewhat different expression in the hero's reflection. Perhaps you might be mistaken if you worry about the dead too much as if you criticize them. The dead do not impose morals on the living. Another important motif related to the theme of the war is a return to national traditional beauty. In an essay written in 1949, when Kawabata was 50 years old, he wrote, "It wouldn't be far-fetched for me to regard my life after the war as the rest of it, and feel as if it is not my own, but an appearance of the tradition of Japanese beauty." In the novels written after the war, Kawabata often made use of traditional motifs such as tea ceremony, traditional no masks, Kyoto's culture, possibly because he wanted to show that Japan still has something to save despite the huge damage of the war. On the other hand, Kawabata also depicts new social trends in Japan after the war in a rather positive tone. For example, in the novel Day and the Moon, the hero, an old man who lost his two sons during the war, had the news that some students tried to hand over a political appeal to the emperor himself when he visited University of Kyoto, and had the impression that it was not someone else's problem. A new attitude towards the emperor as a human being, but not a living god, was one of the most important cultural and social changes after the war, which both the hero and Kawabata himself accepted calmly and positively. Thus, Kawabata's works after the war are characterized by the theme of the war and several subjects relate to it, which helped give him the status of a national writer who is expected to show a new image of national identity and a new path of the country. As was noted earlier, Kawabata's works were made into movies and TV dramas so many times that his image of a new Japan, which was democratized while keeping its traditional values, was supported by many people. And these are photos of tea bowls used traditional tea ceremony. On Southern Cranes, the novel Southern Cranes and its sequel, Plovers on Waves, consisted of a series of short stories written from 1949 to 53, which is a way of writing. The kind of novel Kawabata was fond of. Therefore, Kawabata's novels lacks of a strong unity of plot, while they are characterized by deep lyricism and delicate psychological description. Let me point out some characteristics of Southern Cranes in connection with general features of Kawabata's literature mentioned above. Motif of sexual love and traditional culture. The plot of Thousand Cranes revolves around the hero named Kikuji, a young man in his mid-20s from a wealthy family, and his love affairs with some women, which are faithful and tragic. It is characteristic that sexual love is associated with traditional tea utensils, which Kikuji inherited from his late father. When he looked at two bowls which his father and his lover used, he had an impression. I quote, "Forms of the bowl, 300 or 400 years old, are healthy and do not induce any delusions. They are full of life and even sensual." Looking at the two bowls, Kikuji remembered his father and Fumiko's mother, and felt as if he saw beautiful figures of their souls side by side. The connection of personal life and traditional beauty is a motif which Kawabata often made use of in his works after the war. Thus, he succeeded in representing Japanese tradition not in a formal, but in a personal, lively manner more understandable to the general reader. Motif of a double. Motif of a double. Thousand Cranes is characterized by some sets of a double. Madame Ota and Chikako Krimoto, two women, which both had been lovers of Kikuji's late father, so that Kikuji himself had a complex feeling of love and enmity towards them. Yukiko and Fumiko, two young girls with whom Kikuji tries to have a peaceful and stable love relationship, but in vain. And lastly, Kikuji and his late father, connected by Oedipus complex, which evidently leads to Kikuji's love affair with Madame Ota, who had been a lover of his father's. As is well known, the motif of a double is popular and important in modern literature in many countries. For example, Nikolai Gogol's Nose was one of prototypical works of the double motif in world literature. One can say Kawabata is a writer who was fond of this motif too. Let me illustrate why this motif is so important in modern literature. In my opinion, it has something to do with the concept of the individual, which has been essential in a modern society. But on the other hand, the concept of the individual has something vulnerable in comparison with such concepts as nation, clan, or class, which had been more fundamental in a pre-modern society. This dilemma is more pronounced in countries which started modernization later than others. This is that is why the literary motif of a double has been popular, especially in such countries as Japan or Ukraine, because it is an expression of an anxiety about the notion of the individual who should be the only one, but might also be exchangeable with others. Reconciliation with the dead. In some crimes, the relationship between the living and the dead is important. Kikuji apparently had ambivalent feelings toward his late father, as he told Madame Ota. I quote, "But what could bind you now? Perhaps my father's ghost?" But Madame Ota committed suicide after she had a love affair with Kikuji, her ex-lover's son. Her daughter Fumiko, in whom Kikuji looks for a trace of Madame Ota, also disappeared from his side as if she had passed away. Thus, Freudian Eros and Thanatos combine living and the dead so that Kikuji gradually accepts conflict and parting with the dead. It seems it is reconciliation, not confrontation with the dead, which Kawabata wanted to emphasize in Southern Cranes and other novels written after the war. One can imagine that Japanese as well as other nations had to make their own respective reconciliations with the dead after the war. Perhaps they wanted to make reconciliation with the dead mainly to get some form of relief from their suffering, but it was very necessary for them to start a new life again. In my opinion, Kawabata's works symbolically portrayed survivors' grief for the dead and wishes for a new life, which were shared by many readers of the time. Conclusion. One of the main tasks of a national literature is to create an artistic image of the subject of nation building. Now, we might add that another task of national literature is to create a figure, whether it is real or ideal, of reconciliation and harmony between the living and the dead, who once lived and fought to build and protect the nation. As we try to show, Kawabata became a national writer after the war, in that he tackled the latter task in some novels as Southern Cranes and The Sound of the Mountain, which were popularized in multiple media. One can say that this is how Kawabata became a national writer in Japan. We believe that every nation has and will have such national writers especially after great disasters, who can provide relief to the living. That's all for me. Thank you. ジャックユーザーバーグ。